Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Faye. So let's start with two new appointments that have happened locally. The first one is Michaela Eschbach has now been appointed as CEO of Cambridge Wireless, and she starts that role on May the 13th. And the second is Barnaby Perks, who's taken on the role as the new CEO of St John's Innovation Centre. So congratulations to both of them.
Yes, absolutely. And moving on, AIM-quoted Checkit plc has launched a new product and announced fresh contract wins. Checkit is an augmented workflow and smart sensor automation company for frontline workers, and its new product is called Asset Intelligence, which applies advanced analytics and machine learning to IoT data, which helps enhance customer sustainability, reduce costs and improves revenue. The group has also announced contract wins from two existing customers worth a minimum of £417,000 in total lifetime revenue, and has signed a new contract with an integrated energy company to provide real-time operations management capability to 50 franchisees in the UK worth circa £250,000 over 3 years.
Cambridge biotech company Curate has raised a massively oversubscribed Series A round of $8.5 million. Hargreave Hale AIM VCT led the round. They were joined by XTX Ventures, Guinness Ventures, and existing backers including Playfair Capital, Jonathan Milner's Meltwind, Ascension Life Fund, and Cambridge Angels. And some of you will remember we spoke to Mahanthan in episode 48, so congratulations to him and all of the team there. And now to this week's podcast. Our regular listeners may remember episode 46 last summer with Peter Cowley, which has actually been one of our most listened to podcasts to date. In that episode, we talked about many things with Peter, about being an investor and entrepreneur, and also very briefly about his cancer diagnosis. Since then, and having already written 2 books, Peter decided to write a final book, and we jumped straight on the case and immediately asked him if we could cover the book launch, which took place this last week.
Peter's latest book, Public Success, Private Grief, details for the first time the succession of tragic events that have shaped his life and fueled his relentless drive and ambition.
So for this week's episode, we're going to take you straight into the fireside chat hosted by BBC reporter and co-founder of Composure Media, Louisa Preston. Please be aware this podcast will cover some sensitive issues, including cancer, alcoholism and suicide.
So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Now, most people here this afternoon will obviously know you, Peter, through your very successful career as one of Europe's best-known angel investors and from the many companies that you founded and invested in. But not everyone will know about the tragic events you've had to deal with in your life. And we're going to be talking about some of those events. Difficult topics, as we've already heard about, suicide, alcoholism, and your cancer diagnosis. But we believe it's important to talk about those things, and that will help others as well. But let's start by talking about some of your career successes, which I'm always very interested to hear about. It really has been quite a journey for you, the last 68 years. You don't mind me divulging that?
Some of them, most of them.
Let's start by asking what first inspired you to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, a couple of things really. Three things. One, my father was a dentist, and so he was running a small business, a small service business, where the accounts were done at home by my mum. So I saw hiring and firing and marketing and so on. Secondly, I worked when I was in Australia in my gap year for a guy that became extremely famous as Richard Branson, a guy called Dick Smith, and anybody who's ever lived in Australia will know that name, who's a famous explorer and entrepreneur. And thirdly, because I actually had a little business here at university.
And tell me more about that. I was going to say, what did you learn from your first business venture? Tell me more. A lot, I know.
I think there are only two people in this room that might remember that, actually, Ruth and Mike. A guy called Chris, who's not here, unfortunately, and I bought a travelling discotheque for some veterinary students, and we ran it for a year and then sold it again. And during that time, I learnt about difficult customers. We had the police called at one point, for instance, for being too loud. I learnt about technology a little bit. I learnt about buying records, playing records, marketing, sales, etc. So it was a really useful introduction. We earned less than whatever the minimum wage would have been in those days, but we didn't have drink a lot.
And is it amazing when you look back on your career and you sort of think, there's nothing to lose at the beginning, is there? So really no fear.
Exactly. Yeah, there really was nothing to lose. Well, obviously, what I will have lost is some time spent doing academic stuff, but I got away with that one. So. But no, there's nothing at that point at all. It's later in life, and of course, as you get older, and there's an entrepreneur in the room here who started in his late 40s with a family and a mortgage and everything else.
Yeah,
much more to lose at that point.
Yeah, exactly. You've had so many successes. What stands out for you in particular, though?
Well, there's all kinds of definitions of success. I measure it really by the people that I work with at the time. So James and James are both here, James Hyde and James Strachan. Certainly James Strachan's here. I'm not sure if James Hyde is. David Buxton. These are the people I've helped by being close to and building the businesses. And in both those cases, successfully exiting them. In Gordon's case, worked with him all the way through to an elegant failure, but I still learnt a lot from him and hopefully gave a lot to that. So it's the people that matter. Now, financially, also, as many of you will know, I have had some success. I think I'm a pretty mediocre entrepreneur, but I actually have been a very successful angel investor. And one of them returned over 100 times what I put in.
I know, very impressive indeed. What are you most proud of, though?
I'm proud of what I've given to these people. I'm not proud. Some people call me a super angel, and I hate that term. It's not to do with financial success. Obviously, an angel doesn't want to lose money at the end of it all. They're trying to at least retain their stake and get a return on it. But it's the time I've spent with the hundreds, maybe 1,000 entrepreneurs over the last 15 years. That's what my success is.
It's given you so much, hasn't it?
It is. Enthusiasm, the passion they give, the fact that their generation are more younger than me, keeping me young, the things I learned from them.
So that just covers a snapshot of your business success and is one half of the title of the book, Public Success, the other half, Private Grief. And that's what I want to explore more with you now. We know you co-authored with your wife, but let's talk about your personal life. It's absolutely fabulous, Peter, to see you looking so well. Wouldn't you agree, everybody? I mean, doesn't he look so well? Because many of you in the room will know that just over 2 years ago, Peter was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. But since then, he's run 6 half marathons. That deserves another round of applause, everybody. Camped on the Antarctic Peninsula and done a number of other trips. And I know there's one coming up in the next few weeks, which I'll mention again later. You actually start this book, and can I just say, I'm looking rather tanned because I've just returned from Thailand, a lovely Easter break. And I read this book literally in a couple of hours on the flight out to Thailand. That's how much it gripped me. And you start the book by recalling that moment when you were given that diagnosis. How did you cope in that moment? With great difficulty, and primarily because of the love and support of the people around me, particularly Lise. It was when you're given they didn't tell me at that point what sort of cancer it was, nor whether there was any treatment for it. So when you've told it's stage 4, you immediately think, goodness me, I've only got weeks to go. And in my view, in my mind, I only had 4 weeks to go. So you can imagine the sort of level of panic that was setting in, trying to get all my affairs in order. And on top of that, I was on a very strong dose of a steroid, which was causing all kinds of problems to my sleeping and my weight and my mood and everything else. So that first month was a very different Peter than you see now. And not that many people in this room will have seen that Peter. That was really, really tough. And that gradually ebbed down to the Peter you see here, over a period of many months, actually. Probably took 4 or 5 months before I got to the point where I realized that the drug I was on, which is a daily tablet, which in fact AstraZeneca and Sean Grady might even be in the room, who works there,
the AstraZeneca designed it for people like me. So that was super tough. I mean, I don't know how Lise coped with the... You can ask her later how she coped with me.
Well done. Well
Thank you.
done. In the book, you say you're treating your cancer like a project. That doesn't actually really surprise me, knowing you. But just tell everyone here in the audience how you're running this project.
Yeah, so that didn't happen to start with, but when I got my head around that at least things were looking better and I would be beginning to live on a 3-month by 3-month cycle, I, of course, researched into it. And as you'll see in the book, that Google can be your friend, but it can be a horrendous enemy as well. If you start looking at prognosis of the cancer I had, you don't look into the drugs I was using, you're talking about not many weeks. So getting that right, and then working out how to communicate with people initially. And I went public with it only with my YouTube channel after about 7 or 8 months, once I became comfortable with that, particularly as I thought my brand, which was quite important to me at that point as an angel investor, entrepreneur, author, speaker, might be reduced by being public about it. And then this working with the NHS. Unfortunately, my oncologist can't make it because he's at a conference on lung cancer in Belfast, actually, today. But working a relationship with him and the rest of his team. So there are a number of elements of trying to work out communication, coping, coping with the stress as the scanxiety. I don't know if you've heard the term scanxiety, but this is the point where you get your scans and you've got to wait a couple of weeks later. I was on a podcast yesterday with somebody, a Welsh person who's actually raised 1.4 million for diagnosis in Wales. He's only 40 years old with the same cancer, 2 young kids. Scanxiety. He's already scanxiety, and it's 6 weeks before he gets the results.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. Everyone in the room will want to know how you're doing now. What's the latest on your treatment?
The treatment is the same as it's been all the way through. So I'm still taking the daily pink tablet.
Yeah.
I called it a blue tablet yesterday, which was wrong. Got a laugh out of the audience then. It's a pink tablet. And it's, in my case, there's very few side effects. It's keeping the cancer at bay. I'm not in remission. The cancer is being kept at bay by this drug. Now, as some of you know, it mutated in the middle of last year. Luckily, it was close enough to the surface in my hip they could use radiotherapy. So I still in the same state. In fact, the recent scans showed that the bone in my hip, the tumor was about 55 centimeters across. The bone is regrowing inside that tumor.
Fantastic news. Well done. Thank you, Peter, for sharing all of that. You say in the book that the cancer is easy compared to some of the other challenges you've faced in your life. You've gone through so much grief, losing your younger brother, David, to cancer. He was only 21, wasn't he? And obviously you describe in the book the unbearable pain of losing 2 of your 3 sons to suicide. Many people in this room will obviously remember Alan, your youngest son, and his death back in 2022. It was felt very deeply by this close-knit community here in Cambridge that we have. But some may not know that 13 years earlier, you also lost your middle son, Ian, to suicide. Now, as a parent myself, and as many of you here in this room, you can't even start to comprehend what that must be like to lose 1 child, 2 children. I mean, you just can't deal with it. And I want to ask you how you got through it.
When Ian died in 2009, in fact, as you'd seen in the book, the police rang up and said they'd found a body and they thought it was his. It was appalling times. And I got through it partly by the fact that the police at that point still suspected foul play, but couldn't get enough information. He was living in Glastonbury. Glastonbury is a very closed community. And so I spent a lot of time working with the police, alongside the police, and to some extent outside what they wanted, to track down the last people that Ian had spoken to. So that kept me busy. I also kept busy with what I was doing here in Cambridge. I don't know if Rachel's in the room, but the following day I actually went to a meeting. So this busyness is really important to me, keeping myself...
And you've been like that throughout your life, haven't you? Just busy,
exactly,
busy.
Yeah. And so gradually I built up the picture of how, as far as I could, and I worked out in my own mind the why. Now, there was no note, so we'll never know exactly why. But together with those things, the how and the why, I then created a narrative. And that narrative I then placed in a box, in inverted commas, and tucked it away inside myself, which I can open and visit. But it got to the point where my grieving wasn't showing on a daily or
Day-to-day.
weekly basis.
So it doesn't consume you.
Exactly.
And obviously then with Alan.
With Alan, of course, that's much more recent. It's only 18 months ago. The how and the why, there was more information about, and so I generated my own narrative more quickly, and then packaged that up. And I did that partly because I knew more, but more importantly because I knew I've only got a certain amount of time left, and I didn't want to. With Ian, it took several years. I was psychosomatically ill, and it really took 3 or 4 years. I didn't want that to happen. So I could say I pushed through the speed of grief, something I'm sure a therapist would hate me saying, but I did that to the point where I could carry on with my life. I mean, we were talking earlier and I was in tears, so it's very close to the surface so that I can be the sort of person I am. I can be a loving husband to Lise and Matt, I don't think is in the room, and of course 2 stepdaughters, so that I can get on and have a life and really embrace life over the next months and hopefully years.
And I want to talk about the difficult years in your mid-30s with the alcoholism. But the first question, when I read the book, I thought in those very dark times in your life, that would be the time where maybe you would turn to alcohol again, to numb the pain. But you didn't. Tell me.
No. So I got sober in 2000, in March 2000, and Ian died in August 2009, so that was 9 years later. And at the time, I immediately thought a drink would be the right thing to have because of the anesthetic effect. But also at the same time, I've always got a clear picture of what it was like when I was drinking alcoholically and how much chaos there was in my life and how little I could do to help others, the other people around, his 2 brothers, Alison, all the other people in my life. And so just by remembering the past, knowing that I would be so guilty if I picked up another drink, because I've wasted at that point 9 years, and at this point now 24 years, that I just couldn't do that. I could not. Well, whatever. I managed not to, and I'm convinced that's because I was so worried about the fact if I start drinking, I would ruin my life again, and death would probably ensue fairly quickly.
Because it was a dark time, wasn't it, when you were drinking? I mean, I found that difficult to read in the book, along with obviously the other things.
There are some.
Tell me.
Yeah, there are some examples in there which sound amusing with hindsight, but certainly weren't at the time. There's one example, for instance, that I don't. Hopefully, nobody in this room has ever had the DTs. But when you get the DTs, you're shaking. This is because you haven't drunk for some hours, probably. Because when you're drinking, the DTs disappear. And I actually had an alcoholic fit where the DTs took over at one point. But I remember in the mornings, I really didn't want to drink in the mornings, or the afternoons or the evenings. But if you don't drink in the mornings, at least you've only got the afternoons and evenings to be drunk. But if the DTs are happening, then it's so tempting to pick up a drink. But in that, when you put alcohol into a body that really doesn't want any alcohol, it's going to come straight up again. So putting a tea towel over my mouth was the way to stop it. Now, I learned how to do that at an AA meeting, in fact. So, AA meetings are full of recovering alcoholics, or NA meetings recovering drug addicts. And that carried on for probably many months and probably several years.
What is important, isn't it, to learn or to discuss as well the strengths? Everyone sits here, we hear these stories that are so moving. Peter, you've been through so much. But you learn also so much from those situations. Tell me more a little bit about what you learned from those years as an alcoholic. And
well, the big one that I learned was, and there's a whole chapter on what I learned from AA. AA worked really well for me. It might have worked for other people in this room, but it doesn't work for everybody. And there are a whole set of rules and mantras and things that one can adhere to if one wants to. And one of the big ones was not to regret, because if you start regretting, you end up in a cycle of negativeness, which can so easily, in my case, lead to another drink. So regret you should learn from your mistakes, but you shouldn't regret them, because regret is too strong a negative emotion. So that was one of the many things I learned during that time. But there's the chapter full of sort of takeaways, really, about how I coped with alcoholism.
And just from other aspects of your life, for the people in the room that haven't read the book yet, those lessons learned during your 68 years, the journey.
There's so many of them. I mean, clearly, understanding your own risk appetite, that sounds like a financial business sense, but it also means to other parts of life as well. Grasping opportunities, as you can see at the moment, I'm really taking every opportunity to live life to the full. And if you look back over since I became sober, I've done that many times. I've traveled to nearly 90 countries. So spending time with the right people, I'm a very extrovert person, and a lot of what I have learned to share with others has been based on communication, spending time with others.
And I know you're very passionate. You've said it during this short chat that we've had, how you are passionate about helping other people. And that's probably why you wanted to write this book.
Yeah, so initially with the charity work I did, and then with all the entrepreneurial work, and then the first 2 books, which was to scale me. But this one here is what I believe, and of course, at least it's definitely confident in some way that I'm going to be living 20 years. And Robert Marshall in the room here said that I'd probably go bankrupt before I die, spending too much money. Hopefully Robert will help me out then. But I still believe, because statistically I probably won't last more than a year, that it will be my final legacy. And the legacy is that I hope that by being open, brutally honest, as somebody said, about what I've been through and how I've coped, that this will inspire others in all kinds of different ways, whether it's suicide, which I hope nobody will go through or close to, or it's cancer, or it's alcoholism, that people will be inspired by my journey.
And if you were to look back on your life, the younger Peter, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, the final page or 2 of the book is exactly that. So I did something called Dear 29-Year-Old Self, which was a CEO, which is online, and many people will have read that already. But the back of the book is the Dear 19-Year-Old Self, what you want, I'm telling myself as a late adolescent. And there's all kinds of things like picking up running earlier, not starting in my 60s, and obviously understanding that alcohol is poison, and not, poison for me, because genetically I suspect I've got some sort of addiction gene.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it, as well, because your sister was an alcoholic, wasn't she?
Yeah, she died when she was 52 of alcoholism, despite an awful lot of attempts to help her.
Mm. So you talk, do you ever think about that? Could it be, is there a genetic link? I don't know.
I believe there is. I mean, my sister and I both died of that. My mother, after my brother died, drank very heavily for a while. One of my uncles spent many, many months in rehab. So I'm pretty convinced there is a connection there somewhere.
I just want to say thank you to you, Peter, for being so open and honest and sharing so much of your story. I think I speak for everyone as we wish you well on your next adventure. I know where the next adventure is. In a few weeks, you're off to the US hiking.
Not in a few weeks, in 8 days.
Oh, my gosh, 8 days. So, amazing.
Yeah, so we'd have to start packing at the weekend. So we're away. We're hiring a motor caravan, or an RV, as the Americans call it, and spending 5 weeks just slow travel around a small part of the US Rockies, just day hiking.
So just living your best life.
I hope so. Let's wait and see. Let's see what Lise thinks about this.
There was then a Q&A after the fireside chat, but we've chosen not to cover those on the podcast, as some of it was, as you can imagine, really quite personal.
I mean, the good news is, though, over the coming weeks and months, Peter will be out and about promoting the books. There'll be plenty of opportunity to go and see him. The next is coming up Tuesday with Cambridge Network, and there's also another event in June at ARU scheduled, plus numerous other podcast interviews and media pieces in publications like Business Leader. So please do follow Public Success Private Grief on all its social channels.
Yes, and £2 from the sale of every book will go to Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide. And many of you will have heard about that, especially this week, as the Three Dads Walking have set up on another one of their fundraising missions. So you can find the book on Amazon. You can order it via the book's website if you're outside of the UK.
That's everything for this week's episode. We look forward to joining you next week.
Today's show was produced by Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It will really help others discover the show.